My name is Martyn Pitman. I'm an ex-NHS consultant, obstetrician and gynaecologist, and I've obviously been given the pre-bar slot for the presentations today, so which is going to be perhaps a bit of a challenge. And I'm going to present you today on my experiences as an NHS whistleblower and how I think there is some quite significant relevance to the experiences that I was exposed to the Lucy Letby case. So this was the proudest day of my professional life. I was appointed as a consultant into the Royal Hampshire County Hospital in Winchester on the 3rd of February 2003. This was the hospital that I was born in, so I was appointed to be a consultant in the hospital where I was born, where I grew up, where I was educated, where I undertook some of my registrar training to be a consultant. So it was a very fortunate position to be in. It was my dream job. I loved my job as a consultant. Winchester was a great unit. It punched above its weight. We delivered about 3,200 babies, and it was renowned both locally and nationally to offer a very commendably good maternity service, and our outcomes were pretty universally very good over an extended period. And I took great pride in the job that I did. I was the go-to consultant for most of the members of staff and also most of the other consultants, most of the midwives, nurses, local GPs, and consultants that lived in the area. And that was something that I didn't take lightly. I thought it was something I took great pride in providing that service. As happened to many hospitals of the size of Winchester, we merged with this unit, which is the unit in Basingstoke, in 2012, so 9 years after I was appointed. And this is a unit that was diametrically opposite to Winchester as far as the ethos of the management of the maternity service. At Winchester, we operated on a more traditional system where the consultants led the service, but we had a very, very positive cooperative relationship with our clinical midwifery colleagues, which worked really well. Basingstoke, over the recent time, I worked there as a registrar for 2 years, and it developed a system where a group of senior clinical midwives had migrated into midwifery management, and that had been encouraged and promoted by the consultant obstetricians, and they had gone along the normalisation path, which is, I believe, is one of the reasons that the maternity system in the UK is in the difficulty that it's been in. And what it provokes when you try to push two departments together was analogous, in my view, to trying to mix oil with water. However much you shake it, it doesn't work. And the difficulty we faced at Winchester, the philosophy we were being expected to adopt was basically what we do at Basingstoke is the way to go, and it's either you do what we do or you don't. And that was a challenge. So by the spring of 2019, it was perfectly clear as a senior clinician in our department that things were significantly deteriorating. There were spirally deteriorating standards of care and safety of care. And along with that, our clinical midwifery colleagues were becoming increasingly demoralised. Sickness rates escalated, and all of the managerial positions went to the Basingstoke originating midwives. So our midwives based at Winchester saw no career progression. And perhaps naively, I took great credit that the midwives particularly used me as a sounding board and as a spokesperson, because I think they knew that if they felt strongly about something, that I would do something about it. So I acted as a spokesperson for them and also for my clinical consultant colleagues in obstetrics. I whistleblew. I was concerned that over time we were struggling to provide basic clinical services to our patients. We were having inductions of labour for medical reasons delayed. It was almost became the norm that we would come into the unit and be unable to do elective caesarean sections because we were short of midwifery staffing to support them. So I whistleblew. I did what every clinician in the NHS should realise is a basic and fundamental part of not only their professional responsibilities, but also their moral responsibilities to stand up for their patients, which is not exactly what we've been hearing this afternoon, and to do what is right to try and improve and optimise patient care and patient safety. That was what I did. So what was I like as a senior clinician? Well, This, I think, is an example of that, and that is one of many boxes of thank you cards that I collected over my career. And I took that picture for a Guardian journalist. I think we've got a couple of Guardian journalists here, but a brilliant journalist called Sirin Kale studied what happened to me and one of my patients, and she said, have you got any images of things you've been given by patients? So I took this picture, I laid them all out on my lounge carpets, and it was quite an emotional event. I was incredibly hardworking, I was diligent. I, now looking back on it, made immense personal sacrifices to provide what I thought was optimal standards of patient care. Repeatedly through what happened to me after I whistleblew, I was told that this wasn't about your clinical standards, you have exemplary clinical standards. I had an immaculate 30-year history of annual appraisals. They were commendable. I had 2 completely gold standard GMC revalidations, the latest one of which had been completed and signed off by the very person who professionally came after me 2 months prior to her launching a formal investigation into my conduct. When I questioned that with her, I was told, your appraisal, word for word, your appraisals and revalidation are irrelevant to this process. So I whistleblew with our head of service then, who was our head of midwifery, very bizarre meeting. She listened, nothing came back. She got emotional, she left her office, she never came back. I was talking to her in the same tone as I'm talking to you. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't swear, I didn't get angry. I stayed balanced, I stayed professional. I told her my concerns for the patients that she was responsible for. A couple of weeks later, after some weird events over the preceding 2 weeks, I was summoned, which I realised was a standard part of the process if you've got yourself in the bad books in an NHS trust. They do things to you late on a Friday afternoon because they know damn well that you can do absolutely nothing about it. So at 4:30, I trundled across the car park. I'd been summoned to a meeting that I was falsely told was it was not a formal meeting, it was an informal meeting to discuss communication issues that have been raised with the trust senior management about our department. I walked straight into what in the first 30 seconds became absolutely obvious was the launch of a formal disciplinary investigation, what's called a maintaining high professional standards investigation against me. On the table were plasticized printed dossiers of utter garbage that had been fabricated by the person that I had whistleblown to and her senior midwifery managerial colleagues. Fabricated nonsense about me and what I had supposedly done, but I hadn't. I was urged to sign terms of reference, which I refused. They'd been deliberately written to catch me out. I was accused of bullying, I was accused of harassment, I was accused of undermining behaviour, and I was told that the case manager had been appointed to my case, who happened to be a close working associate of my main complainant, and I was told that this investigation, because of the effect it would have on me, would last for 6 weeks. It lasted for over 18 months. I was told on Monday we have an appointment for you to see the occupational health consultant because this is going to be challenged to. I saw her. I was then banished from my career. I was told until your investigation is complete, you can't work on the main site at Winchester, you can't do label, you can't do on-calls, you can't do your ultrasound scan list. I did fetal medicine scanning. I was banished to the local cottage hospital where I was only allowed to do outpatients clinics and antenatal clinic. My fetal medicine scanning, this was demoted to that of a basic ultrasonographer. And that was where I stayed for essentially 18 months whilst the investigation into me was conducted. This was a lonely, desperate, incredibly isolating existence. I was denied any contact with any of my consultant colleagues. I was denied any contact at all with any of my clinical midwifery colleagues. The terms of references for the investigation into me were not upheld. They were not upheld, but I was told, but you do have a problem. You have a problem with your communication style. So I was forced to have mediation with my remaining complainants, 2 of whom had actually left the trust when they realized I wasn't going to be immediately dismissed. And I was asked to go on an advanced communication course organised by the BMA, which I then duly did. Then things started to turn. I eventually returned back to work. It was perfectly clear that I was still being monitored. From the moment I walked back into the trust, there was an unnerving feeling that every conversation I had, every telephone discussion I had, every call that I did, every procedure I did was being very closely monitored. And then a tragedy happened. So we had a completely avoidable maternal death, a lady who should never have been allowed to labour, let alone actively encouraged to labour, laboured and ruptured her uterus, had an amniotic fluid embolism, not a Dowie-Evans air embolism, and she tragically died. The baby survived, and it became perfectly, I wasn't a caller, I had nothing to do. I wish I had been consulted about this lady, because she certainly wouldn't have gone down the route that she did had I been. It was perfectly clear that moves were underway in the trust to cover up what had happened. So knowing that I was already in a precarious position, I thought, well, I can do one of two things. I can either shut up and let this happen, or I can say, hold on a second. So being me, I did the latter. I whistleblew internally about what had happened, and I was told to butt out. It was investigated, and my concerns were dismissed. So I whistleblew to the local coroner, and I converted a basic coroner's hearing into an adversarial coroner's hearing where at least this lady's husband and family got at least some of the answers that they deserved. I was dismissed 10 days before that coroner's hearing happened. I was, and this I shortened what happened, but basically the trust spent around between £800,000 and £1 million on legal input, and approaching £100,000 on 3 increasingly corrupt external investigations to basically prove that they could legally dismiss me under some other substantial reason, which is how they eventually dismissed me, but 10 days before this inquest, which wasn't a coincidence. And what followed were fabricated accusations about me being clinically incompetent to perform the consultant role that I performed with some credit for nearly 20 years. So 3 years after I whistleblew, CPC descended on the trust, and they wrote a damning report into the unit. Interesting that they found every single deficiency that I'd found 3 years earlier, every single one of them. The service was downgraded to improvement needed, and my department was placed on the NHS England Maternity Improvement Scheme. And when the Trust Chief Executive and the Director of Nursing, both of whom were instrumental in achieving my dismissal, were interviewed by the local press, their economy of truth in what they said to the press extended to them feigning complete surprise about what CQC had found. They were interviewed on the local TV, and they said it was all a great surprise to them, whereas I and other people had warned exactly about these problems 3 years earlier. When I was dismissed, there was a pretty commendable amount of both local and national press interest about my dismissal. I was sacked as a whistleblower, and that was pretty trendy at the time. So I appeared in the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian, and the local newspapers. And I submitted a grievance against the trust, what happened to me, and I have full BMA-supported pursuit of a whistleblowing detriment case through the Employment Tribunal. Just before, in the month before my highly unpleasant experience in the Employment Tribunal, the trust went on a charm offensive to try and prove to the world that they actually supported whistleblowing and freedom to speak up. So wherever you looked in the trust, or on all the computer screens, that was a screensaver. All of the printed paperwork that went out of the trust had "We support whistleblowing and freedom to speak up," and they even went as far on the right-hand side as paying out for a private artist to paint 3 murals on the wall in each of the hospitals, just to try and convince people that rather than destroying whistleblowers, they actually actively supported them. So I entered this hellhole of a place about 2 weeks after Lucy Letby's judgment came out, and I had been totally and utterly focused on what I was doing, and I had just been seduced by the mainstream media and press about Lucy Letby. I was certain when her verdict came out that she was guilty, absolutely certain. And I naively thought I was the first NHS whistleblower to get into a courtroom after Lucy Letby, and because at the time when I went in, I thought, oh, the doctors in the Cancer Chester were the whistleblowers. They're the heroes in this. I naively thought because of that my passage through this dire process would go in my favour as another NHS whistleblower. It wasn't until a few weeks later when I saw the Carmarthen clown being interviewed in his back garden, and I thought, hold on a second, this doesn't add up. This guy is an absolute charlatan, that I started then to be in the position where I am now, where I realise that every single fragment of what is being presented as evidence is unsafe in her conviction. So you enter as a whistleblower into a court in the UK. So I entered that courtroom knowing that I should have won, but also knowing that I had a 97% chance of failing. Those were the statistics then. Just take that in for a second, a 97% chance of failing. Now, it's a 99% chance of failing. That is how dire it is. You are set up to fail. A lot of local and national press interest, just here in relation to the courts, every day of the court, there were 50 patients with banners, T-shirts, supporting me. It was an incredibly sobering experience. But I lost. The case went as well as it could have gone. I had a very experienced barrister. In the space of 5.5 weeks, we went from being taken to the pub to celebrate that my barrister, this was in the bag, having discussions about what level of settlement I would accept, to receiving a judgment which read like it was a completely different case to the one that I spent 2 weeks traversing. It was astonishing that could happen in the UK. The judgment concluded that I was a whistleblower, no great surprise there, but I lost the case because the judge inexplicably, there are reasons which I won't go into, but inexplicably said he was unable to link any of the detriments that I suffered to my whistleblowing. I lost my job apparently, not because of what I said. I lost my job and any chance of re-establishing a career, not because of what I said, but astonishingly because of how I said it. That was why I lost my career. So I've got perhaps not surprisingly, a very dire view of what it's like to get into the UK legal system. I think it's a highly dangerous place to go. In my own view, in my opinion, the employment tribunal system in the UK is corrupt and it is broken. And until that changes, none of this is going to change. Maternity care is not going to improve. In my case, there is absolutely no record at all of what happened in my hearing. It wasn't recorded, it wasn't minuted, nothing was transcribed. The only legally admissible record of what happened to me are my judge's handwritten notes. And guess what? I have absolutely no legal right to get a copy of those. Having tried, I am not permitted. How does that represent fair justice? How does that represent open justice? How does that not represent a breach of my basic human rights to a fair trial? In my view, after Lucy Letby's tragic case, I think somebody decided that the NHS was unable to tolerate the possibility of another whistleblowing case going against it, particularly one that involved its already beleaguered maternity service. So I and my career was seen as an expendable resource. It didn't matter if I was destroyed. It didn't matter if my career was destroyed. After my dismissal, I was making supper on the 5th of January, 2024, in our kitchen, making supper, and I looked up and I was on the TV screen. I thought, what's this? So I rewired it on Sky, and the whole programme was taken up by what had happened to my department. And they interviewed patients, they interviewed staff, and they showed pictures of me and my family coming out of the employment tribunal. I was named, blamed, and shamed for what had happened in the department and the trustees. Then, thankfully now was retired, was announcing that we got over this, we got over the problems that this individual caused, and we moved on. But interesting, at the end of the interview, she was asked, can you reassure, they'd invited the local BBC into the unit, can you reassure your patients that you're able to provide safe care for your patients? She hesitated, she giggled, then she said, well, yes but we have to accept that when it's busy, it can be a struggle. They'd invited the BBC in, and that was her response when asked if they could provide a safe level of service. And then I realised probably why they'd done that, because I was then told by an anonymous individual who worked in the trust that a presentation in the neonatal unit a month later had shown that they had detected significantly raised HIE rates for the non-medical people in the auditorium. This is basically most commonly labour-induced hypoxic, so oxygen starvation to the brain. Interestingly, this was the year after I was dismissed. Even more interestingly, I spent my career devoted to minimising HIE rates in that unit and have been commended repeatedly for my successful efforts in that regard. So because of the level of interest in, the press interest in what had happened in my case, and then when this was announced to them, it provoked a double-page spread by Sirin Gale in the Guardian on the left there, and I had an interview with the Hampshire Chronicle, and they announced this frightening statistic. The Trust's reaction to it was fascinating. Because initially, when the journalists contacted the Trust to discuss this, they denied it. They said, no, we have no record at all of that data. You need to check your source. So when I then gave them the source, they then said, oh, that data. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So they denied it. They then accepted it, and they then admitted that the increase equated to not just an increase, a 5 times increased risk of HIE. But then they did something that's even more incredible. They then did their own internal investigation into this stat, and guess what? The data was normalized, back to rates which were normal. So whistleblowing. It's a career peril in the NHS, and I think it is as bad, if not worse now, than it was in 2019 when I did what I did. I think most of us in here will know that Lucy Letby, we've heard so much about her today. She was a whistleblower, wasn't she? She was a whistleblower. She pressed the wrong buttons like I did. She threatened individual senior clinicians' reputations. She threatened the trust's manager's reputation. She threatened the organisational reputation, as I did. That will not be tolerated. And most NHS trusts to this day, if you do what I did, if you do what Lucy Letby did, they won't change the practices. They will take out the messenger. They will take out the whistleblower, which is why my job was ended, the career that I love was terminated, and that's why I believe what happened to Lucy Letby happened to Lucy Letby. She pressed the wrong buttons on the wrong people. So that's the very last book that I ever delivered. That was the last of their insertion. Thank you.